The clinking of crystal and forced laughter filled the ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Center stage, standing on a small platform, was Rayanch Kuznetsov, the epitome of self-proclaimed success. With a microphone in hand and a smile that didn't quite reach his cold eyes, he prepared for the climax of his speech. Beside him, Tilda Jones, his fiancée, gazed at him with an adoration that only money and status can buy. "And that's why," Rayanch said, projecting his voice so all 150 guests could hear, "it's so important to surround yourself with people who share your vision, people who elevate you." He paused dramatically, looking directly at Tilda. "I've had to shed a lot of dead weight, anchors that held me back to a small-minded conformist mentality. But today, standing beside Tilda and her wonderful family, I know I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Flying with eagles." The jab was clear to the few who knew his history, but to most it was just the arrogant rhetoric of a man who thought himself king of the world. He raised his champagne flute, a toast to the future, a future devoid of mediocrity. The guests applauded politely, raising their own glasses. It was at that very moment, at the peak of his self-congratulation, that the imposing double doors of the ballroom swung open, not with the discretion of a waiter or a late guest, but with a silent authority that made all conversation cease. A woman stood at the threshold, and her presence sucked all the oxygen from the room. It wasn't her beauty, though it was undeniable, nor the dress she wore, though it was clearly a haute couture piece. It was the aura. An energy of power and calm radiated from her, making the ballroom's luxury suddenly seem cheap. Rayanch narrowed his eyes, irritation beginning to cloud his expression. Who dared interrupt his moment? Then he recognized her. His smile froze. His champagne flute stopped inches from his lips. It was Katerina Rojas. Zidane. At 28, she looked nothing like the young woman he had discarded 2 years prior. The uncertainty in her eyes had been replaced by a razor-sharp clarity, and the slightly hunched posture of someone apologizing for existing had given way to an erect spine of pure confidence. Rayanch never imagined that the day of his engagement, the apex of his social climb, would be invaded by the most troublesome ghost from his past. He had left her with a cold, calculated voicemail, telling her their relationship had become a burden to his ambitions. "I need more, Katerina," he'd said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Someone who will lift me up, not anchor me to your lack of ambition." Now she stood there, and she didn't look anchored at all. In fact, she looked like she owned the damn ocean. For a moment, a memory hit him like a punch. The image of her in his old, cramped apartment, surrounded by diagrams and prototypes for a project he'd dismissed as her childish hobby. It was plans for a type of sustainable energy technology. He remembered laughing, telling her to get a real job. "You'll never get out of poverty with these useless dreams," he'd sneered. The memory dissipated, and reality snapped him back to the silent ballroom. All eyes were now alternating between him and Katerina. Confusion was palpable. Tilda leaned in and whispered, venom dripping from her voice, "Who is that? She looks lost." Rayanch, regaining his composure, stepped off the stage with forced confidence. He needed to control the narrative, and fast. The best way to do that was to humiliate her publicly and reassert his power. He walked towards her, the condescending smile back on his face. "Katerina? What an unpleasant surprise." His voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I assume you're looking for the service entrance. It's around the back, dear. I think you've gotten confused." The insult hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Some of Rayanch's friends, like Mert Kraus, let out muffled chuckles. They were ready for the spectacle, to see the man they admired put the poor ex in her place. But Katerina didn't react as he expected. There were no tears, no stammering, no face flushed with shame. Instead, a slight smile played on her lips, a smile that made him deeply uncomfortable. She simply extended her hand, not to greet him, but to hand him something. It was an invitation. Confused, Rayanch took it. The paper was of a weight he'd never felt before, heavy and textured. The gold lettering wasn't printed. It was embossed in real gold leaf. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, the most luxurious invitation he had ever seen in his life, making the ones he'd sent for his own party look like supermarket flyers. He read the words and his brain refused to process them. It was an invitation to a private event, at the same venue and on the same date as his party. But the host's name wasn't his. It was written in elegant script, Katerina Rojas Zidane, on behalf of Zidane Innovations. Rayanch looked up from the invitation, blood draining from his face. His mouth went dry. What was Zidane Innovations? He'd never heard of it, but then he saw it. Across the room, Katerina made subtle eye contact with the hotel's general manager, a notoriously intimidating man who never deigned to speak to anyone below CEO level. The manager nodded at her, a gesture of unmistakable respect and deference. In that instant, Rayanch's armor of arrogance began to crack. He felt a chill run down his spine, the first seed of panic blooming in his chest. There, facing the contempt of his ex and his fiancée, Katerina stood firm like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right moment. What Rayanch didn't know was that tonight wasn't about him. It never was. It was about her, and the party was just getting started. If you've ever been underestimated by someone you loved, you know that the best response isn't an argument, but a demonstration of power. Subscribe to discover how Katerina would turn her ex's engagement party into the stage of her coronation, proving that the greatest revenge is a success so immense, her enemies can't even comprehend it. Rayanch's panic was a living creature writhing in his stomach, but his pride was an even stronger wall. He couldn't lose control, not in front of Tilda, not in front of her family, not in front of everyone he'd spent years trying to impress. Is this some kind of joke? He hissed at Katerina, crushing the expensive invitation in his hand. Did you forge this? What do you want? Money? Is that it? Did you come here to make a scene to extort me? Katerina maintained her serene smile. Rayanch, you always assume the worst of people. And more importantly, you always assume everything revolves around you. Before he could respond, Tilda Jones stepped between them, acting as a human shield of privilege. That's enough, she said, disdain evident in every syllable. I don't know who you are, and frankly, I don't care. Security will escort you to the exit. She looked Katerina up and down, an assessing gaze that catalogued and discarded. Some people simply don't understand what an exclusive event means. This isn't a charity. Rayanch felt a flash of relief. Tilda was handling it. He nodded to one of the burly security guards by the entrance. The man began to walk towards them, but stopped midway, looking at the hotel manager. The manager gave a barely perceptible nod, and the guard retreated to his post, impassive. Rayanch's confusion turned to cold anger. His order, as the host, had been ignored. There's been a mistake, he said, his voice louder now, drawing more attention. I am the host of this party, and I demand that this woman be removed immediately. The humiliation of being ignored at his own party was unbearable. For Katerina, each arrogant word, each scornful glance, was like fuel. She remembered sleepless nights, working on her algorithms, while Rayanch went out with his important contacts. She remembered the day she got her first small investment, $20,000 from an angel investor who believed in her prototype. When she told him, exultant, he'd chuckled. 20,000? Katerina, my watch is worth more than that. It's cute that you're playing businesswoman, but don't fool yourself. Weeks after breaking up with her, he started posting photos on his social media. Michelin-starred dinners, weekend yacht trips, always, with women who looked like they'd stepped out of an heiress catalog. The caption on one photo in particular hit her like a punch. Finally flying with eagles, not stuck on the ground with chickens. He wanted her to see. He wanted her to feel small, insignificant, a mistake he had corrected. And now, here he was, trying to make her feel small again. But something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer the person seeking his approval. She was the person signing the checks. Everything going according to plan? A calm, crisp voice sounded beside her. Una de Vries had materialized, elegant and sharp as an obsidian dagger. If Katerina was the brilliant mind behind the technology, Una was the ingenious strategist who turned it into an empire. It was Una who saw the potential in Katerina's useless dreams and connected her with the right venture capital. Una was more than a partner. She was the architect of their rise, and now, of Katerina's revenge. Perfectly, Katerina replied, not taking her eyes off Rayanch. Una's presence seemed to further irritate Rayanch. Two women, calm and in control, while he lost his. The scene was becoming the focus of the entire ballroom. Whispers grew. "It's his ex," Mert Kraus told a group of friends. "The one who had no money. Poor thing, she must be desperate to get back with him now that he's engaged to a Jones." The narrative they were building was exactly what Rayanch wanted. The desperate, crazy ex who couldn't stand to see him happy. Dmitri Lefebvre, Rayanch's father, a man whose backbone was made of bank statements, approached his son, his face a mask of disapproval. "Rayanch, handle this, now. You're making us look foolish. Who is this woman, and why is the hotel staff protecting her?" The pressure was overwhelming. Rayanch felt sweat trickling down his back. His perfect night, the night that would solidify his position in high society, was crumbling. He needed one final show of force. He decided to confront her, to humiliate her so definitively that she would have no choice but to flee in tears. He took a step forward, his body tensed with rage, his finger pointed at her. "I'll say it one last time, Katerina. Get out of my party." Each new humiliation only strengthened something within Katerina that her oppressors couldn't see. A silent force being fed by the very injustice they tried to impose. Rayanch walked towards her, his face a mask of controlled fury, ready to throw her out publicly. What those privileged people didn't know was that every step he took towards her was a step towards his own ruin. They thought they were cornering a rat, but they were about to discover they had poked a sleeping lion, and the roar would be deafening. Rayanch cornered Katerina and Yuna near the terrace, away from the bulk of the guests, but still within view of many. He wanted an audience, but one that would allow him to maintain the illusion of control. "The game is over, Katerina," he said, his voice low and laced with threat. "I don't know what little game you're trying to play, but it ends now. Walk out that door on your own, or I'll call the police and have them drag you out for trespassing." He expected to see fear in her eyes, despair, anything that confirmed his superiority. Instead, Katerina took a champagne flute from a passing waiter's tray, took a slow, deliberate sip, and looked at him over the rim of the glass. "Call the police?" she asked, her voice tinged with genuine amusement. "Rayanch, that would be problematic, because you can't call the police to escort out the person who is paying for all of this." Rayanch let out a laugh, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Paying? You? With what money? Sold a few more of your crafts online? Got a loan to fund this charade and embarrass me?" He turned to Yuna. "And you? Are you her accomplice in this ridiculous theater?" Yuna de Vries was unfazed. Instead of answering, she took a tablet from her bag and, with a tap, illuminated the screen. "Mr. Kuznetsov, perhaps this will help clarify things." She turned the tablet towards him. On the screen was a digital document. It was the full-service contract with the hotel for that evening's event. The ballroom, the gourmet catering, the chamber orchestra, the open bar with the most expensive drinks. Everything was detailed, item by item. And at the end, the digital signature of the client and proof of full payment made 3 months prior. The name on the client line was unmistakable: Katerina Rojas Zidane, CEO, Zidane Innovations. Rayanch stared at the screen, his eyes darting frantically over the words. This is fake," he stammered, but the conviction in his voice was fading. "It's a setup, a fraud." He couldn't reconcile the Katerina he knew, the Katerina who counted pennies for rent, with the woman who could afford a night that cost more than his annual salary. The reality was so absurd, his brain refused to accept it. "How?" he whispered, the question escaping before he could contain it. That moment of vulnerability was all Katerina needed. "While you were busy flying with eagles, I was building the rocket," she said calmly. And then the memory came, not as a flashback for him, but as a vivid recollection for her. 8 months ago, she and Yuna were in a makeshift office surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations when the news arrived. The acquisition offer. A tech giant wanted their algorithm, Katerina's silly idea. The value was astronomical, a 9-figure sum. They celebrated with cheap champagne and pizza, laughing and crying with relief and joy. That same night, scrolling through social media, Katerina saw Rayanch's post, a photo of him and Tilda, the diamond ring glittering on her finger with the caption, "She said yes." preparing for the event of the year, elite only. It was Yuna who planted the seed. "What do you want to do?" she asked, seeing the pain mixed with rage in her friend's eyes. Katerina looked at the photo of the smug couple and an audacious plan began to form in her mind. "I want to give him the engagement party he always dreamed of," Katerina said, a dangerous glint in her eyes. The party he could never afford. The plan was executed with military precision. Yuna found out through a contact that Rayanch had tried to hire a renowned event planner, but had treated her so poorly she quit. Resentful, the planner was more than happy to share all the details of Rayanch's plans. The dream, venue, the menu he wanted, the band he coveted. Katerina and Yuna simply contacted each vendor and offered double, demanding exclusive contracts. They weren't just throwing a party. They were buying his dream and turning it into a nightmare. Back in the present, the reality of the situation began to seep into the ballroom. The orchestra conductor approached the trio, completely ignoring Rayanch. "Mrs. Zidane, we are ready for your special announcement whenever you wish." Shortly after, the hotel's executive chef emerged from the kitchen, his toque blanche impeccable. "Mrs. Zidane, are the caviar canapes to your liking? May I prepare another batch?" Each interaction was a small stab at Rayanch's inflated ego. Each Ms. Zidane was a reminder that he was nobody here. The power had shifted so completely and silently that most guests still didn't understand what was happening, but they felt the change in the atmosphere. Rayanch's face went from red with rage to white with panic. Reality hit him like a cold wave. He wasn't the host. He wasn't the important man. He was just a guest, a pawn in someone else's game. A guest at his ex-girlfriend's revenge party. And if she had the power and audacity to orchestrate all of this in secret, what else had she planned for the night? For a moment, as he looked at Katerina's calm smile, everyone thought they would witness an ugly argument, but those who watched closely would notice it wasn't a smirk of provocation. It was the smile of a general, surveying the battlefield, knowing victory was already assured. It was the smile of someone about to execute checkmate. His humiliation had only just begun. Rayanch's panic turned to desperation. He grabbed Tilda's arm, pulling her into a corner with an urgency that startled her. "The party, it's not ours," he whispered, his words stumbling over each other. "It's hers. Katerina. She paid for everything. It's a trap." Tilda looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Then she looked around, at the deference with which the staff treated Katerina, at the woman's unwavering confidence, and the truth began to penetrate her bubble of privilege. Her face contorted into a mask of fury and contempt. "You told me you had everything handled, that it was to impress my father. What kind of man are you that you let some poor ex-girlfriend hijack our engagement party?" The foundation of their relationship, her belief in his power and wealth, was cracking beneath her feet. As their private drama unfolded, Katerina made her move. With a grace that belied the storm she was about to unleash, she ascended the steps of the small stage and took the microphone from the master of ceremonies, who looked relieved to hand over the responsibility. Instantly, a hush fell over the ballroom. All conversations, all whispers died. 150 pairs of eyes were fixed on her. "Good evening, everyone," Katerina began, her voice calm but resonating with an authority that filled every corner of the room. "For those who don't know me, my name is Katerina Rojas Zidane. I'd like to thank you all for coming to my celebration." A confused murmur swept through the crowd. "My celebration? I know many of you have come to celebrate the engagement of Rayanch Kuznetsov and Tilda Jones," she continued, looking directly at the couple who now stared at her in horror. "And they are indeed the reason I organized this event tonight." The giant screen behind the stage, which until then had displayed a loop of carefully selected smiling photos of Rayanch and Tilda, flickered and went black for a second, and then it lit up again. But it was no longer a photo of the happy couple. It was a screenshot of a text message, magnified so everyone could read it. The words were stark and cruel. "You'll stay poor with your silly ideas while I build an empire." The date, 2 years ago, was clearly visible at the top. 2 years ago, Katerina said, her voice firm as steel. "Rayanch told me I was dead. Wait, that my silly ideas would never get me anywhere." The silence in the ballroom was now so thick it felt physical. The guests looked from the screen to Rayanch, whose face was ashen. It turns out the silly idea, Katerina continued as the image on the screen changed again, was an algorithm for sustainable energy optimization. The screen now displayed a collage of headlines from reputable financial publications: Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. Zidane Innovations closes. Billion-dollar deal for revolutionary technology, one read. The meteoric rise of Katerina Zidane, the new titan of green tech, proclaimed another. Her name, and her company's, was everywhere. My company, Zidane Innovations, sold the patent for that silly idea last month. For a sum, she paused, letting the weight of her next words sink in. That would make Rayanch's empire look like a lemonade stand. A collective gasp swept through the room. Tilda's father, a shrewd investor, looked as though he had seen a ghost. He knew that name. He knew that deal. He had missed the opportunity to invest in Zidane Innovations in its early stages, a mistake that had cost him a fortune. And here was his future son-in-law, the man who had mocked the mind behind it all. Rayanch's humiliation was total and absolute, but Katerina wasn't finished yet. Rayanch has always dreamed of a party like this, to impress the right people and climb the ladder. He has always valued appearances above all else. So I considered this my parting gift, a tangible and very expensive reminder of what greed and prejudice made him lose. She raised her glass. And to prove I hold no grudges, I have one last announcement. The tension was unbearable. Earlier today, Zidane Innovations made a formal offer to acquire Jones Consolidated, Tilda's family company. The screen changed one last time, showing the official letterhead of the acquisition offer. The offer was aggressive, too generous to be refused, without a shareholder revolt. Tilda and her father stared at the screen, their faces a mixture of shock and dread. Katerina looked directly at Tilda, her smile now razor-sharp. I believe negotiations will commence on Monday, and if all goes well, that makes me your future boss. Then she turned to Rayanch, who stood frozen, a statue of failure. And as for you, Rayanch, I believe that makes you, well, utterly irrelevant. She placed the microphone softly back on the lectern. There were no shouts, no insults. The execution had been clinical, precise, and far more devastating than any outburst of anger. She simply presented the facts and let them destroy his world. It was Tilda who broke the silence. With a shriek of fury, she yanked the engagement ring off her finger and flung it at Rayanch's chest. You lied to me, she hissed, the venom in her voice capable of curdling blood. You're nothing. You're a failure. She turned and marched out of the ballroom, her family following her, like a funeral procession, leaving Rayanch alone at the center of the disaster he had created. At the heart of that ballroom where arrogance disguised as success once reigned, a new reality was now taking shape. Rayanch stood alone, the engagement ring glinting mockingly at his feet, the sound of his fabricated empire crumbling echoing louder than the now silent music. The masks had fallen, revealing not only his fraud but the silent power he had so underestimated. Revenge had been served, but the story was far from over. A question lingered in the air. What happens to a man who loses everything at the exact moment he realizes the true value of what he threw away? 1 year later, the cover of Wired magazine featured a powerful portrait of Katerina Rojas Zidane. The headline read, "The Billion-Dollar Visionary, How Katerina Zidane is Rewriting the Future of Energy." The inside story detailed not only her staggering success with Zidane Innovations, but also her revolutionary approach to management. After successfully acquiring Jones Consolidated, she didn't mass-fire employees as everyone expected. Instead, she restructured the company from the ground up, investing in internal talent that had been overlooked by the old management and implementing a culture of innovation and respect. She saved hundreds of jobs and transformed a stagnant company into an agile, profitable powerhouse. Katerina wasn't just rich, she was respected. She became a prominent philanthropist, establishing the Zidane Foundation with a singular purpose: to fund young female entrepreneurs, especially those whose projects were deemed silly or dreamy by the establishment. She was building a legacy, turning the pain of her own experience into opportunity for others. Her personal life also flourished. Far from the drama and toxicity, she found a partner in Samuel Walsh, a brilliant environmental ethics professor who fell in love with her mind long before he understood the extent of her fortune. Their relationship was built on mutual admiration and long conversations about changing the world, not about which yacht to buy next. She was genuinely happy, a state of being that money couldn't buy, but that her hard work and integrity had certainly facilitated. Meanwhile, Rayanch Kuznetsov's world had shrunk to a prison of bitterness and regret. The story of the revenge engagement party became a legend in social and business circles. No one wanted to be associated with the man who was so blinded by arrogance that he couldn't see genius right under his nose. He was fired from his high-potential job weeks after the fiasco, as the company didn't want the negative publicity. Tilda's influential family ensured every other door slammed shut in his face. Without the income to maintain his lavish lifestyle, he was forced to sell his apartment, his sports car, and his expensive watches. The last anyone heard, he had moved back into his childhood bedroom at his parents' house. The final scene of his decline was pathetic. On a Tuesday night, he sat in the dark, illuminated only by the glow of his phone. He obsessively scrolled through his news feed, a vicious cycle of self-inflicted torture. There was Katerina, cutting the ribbon at a new research center. There she was, laughing with Samuel on a vacation photo from a remote, beautiful locale. There she was, living the life he could have shared, a life far bigger and more meaningful than the one he had planned for himself. He felt not just envy, he felt a profound emptiness, the belated, painful realization that he had discarded gold thinking it was gravel. He had become exactly what he feared most, irrelevant. Minor characters who had once fawned over him now sang Katerina's praises. Olga Neumann, a socialite who had been at the party, was quoted in a magazine article. "We all saw an arrogant man that night, but what we truly witnessed was the birth of an icon. Katerina Zidane's audacity and brilliance are a lesson for us all." Una de Vries, now the acclaimed COO of Zidane Innovations, was often asked about that night. In one interview, she smiled. "People call it revenge. We call it a highly effective market restructuring. Rayanch wasn't the victim. He was simply a negative externality in a much larger success equation." Katerina's life lesson became clear to everyone. Her ultimate intention wasn't just to destroy Rayanch, but to reclaim her own story on her own terms. She didn't let his definition of her become her reality. Her success wasn't a weapon of cruelty, but the inevitable manifestation of her talent and resilience. His humiliation wasn't the goal, it was merely a byproduct of his own myopia. He tried to destroy Katerina, but he ended up destroying himself. Katerina learned that true revenge isn't about reciprocating the harm suffered, it's about achieving the success your enemies could never imagine. And you, what would you have done in Katerina's place? Let us know in the comments if you believe revenge is a dish best served cold, or if success is the best answer. If this story of overcoming injustice has inspired you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because sometimes karma needs a little help, and we'll be here to tell every detail.